This is not a time for celebration. It's a time for being very serious. For too long, Washington has been in gridlock, gridlock, gridlock.
This is not a very proud day in the history of the Senate. In order to distract attention away from Obamacare, the Senate has just broken the rules in order to change the rules.
I support the step a majority of senators today took to change the way that Washington is doing business. Ultimately, if you got a majority of folks who believe in something, then it should be able to pass.
Well, by a vote of 52 to 48, Senate Democrats changed the rules in the U.S. Senate today for most of presidential nominations, changing about 225 years of precedent in that body. Both the president and the vice president were senators at one time.
The American people want less partisanship in this town, but everyone in this chamber knows that if the majority chooses to end the filibuster, if they choose to change the rules and put an end to democratic debate, then the fighting and the bitterness and the gridlock will only get worse.
I say to my friends on the Republican side, you may own the field right now, but you won't own it forever. And I pray God when the Democrats take back control, we don't make the kind of naked power grab you are doing.
Okay, with that, let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard. A.B. Stoddard, associate editor of The Hill, and syndicated columnist George Will. A.B.
You know, I'm going to be told I'm not cynical enough, but I was actually really surprised that this happened because, you know, as a mom, you threaten to take the TV and break it, and it's a great threat because your kids think it'll be the worst thing ever, but they kind of know you're not going to do it. And I didn't think they'd do it because it's not smart. The Democrats are going to pay for this, just like Senator McConnell said, they're going to regret it. I was stunned that they would do it for that reason. I can understand their exasperation. I think that the nonpartisan, bipartisan new precedent in politics of abusing the filibuster is a shame, and it's created more gridlock. But what they've done by grabbing power in this way and breaking longstanding, one-century-old rule of the Senate is going to increase partisanship and gridlock.
George.
Well, both parties have been situational ethicists regarding this in a disgraceful way. In 2005, when the Republicans threatened essentially this, I strenuously opposed it, and I strenuously oppose this. It's a melancholy day for American life. This diminishes minority rights, which are always a threat in a democracy where majorities rule. It further expands presidential power, which is too powerful under Republicans and Democrats alike. But it coarsens American governance in this sense. The founders knew that democracy had to be more than counting noses, more than simply adding up majorities. They had to come up with ways to measure intensity, which the filibuster does. And in fact, now we've seen what Senator Vandenberg of Michigan a long time ago warned against. He said, if a majority in the Senate can at any time, on any issue, change any rule, then you don't have rules. You have simply the will of the majority of the moment. And it's a sad day for what used to be a great deliberative body.
Steve, both sides, as you might imagine, have their talking points and their charts. A lot of them talking about this. The Democrats coming out with a chart about President Obama and how many times he's been blocked with nominations. And here is their filibusters on President Obama's nominations as compared to previous presidents. But then the Republicans point out that the vast majority of President Obama's nominees have been confirmed. And there you see the number rejected there. So two different charts telling two different, very different stories.
And this is why everybody hates Washington. I mean, this is the hypocrisy on this is, of course, legendary. It goes back both ways. But I think George is absolutely right. This is a terrible step for the country. And what's interesting is Harry Reid is doing this despite the fact that in 2008 he ruined it would, quote, ruin the country. I mean, talk about being dramatic. He's doing this, he says, on a limited number, on a limited basis, only for certain nominations. Nobody expects that that will be the case. I mean, it's interesting to listen to the discussion just over the past few hours. Everybody understands that that will not be the case, that this will soon graduate, that we will be talking about bigger nominations, that we will be talking eventually about legislation. Chuck Grassley, senator from Iowa, said today Republicans will use this to get Supreme Court nominees passed.
Because right now it doesn't. Now it does not include Supreme Court nominees.
Right.
But he's suggesting that what's to prevent
And
it?
he's right. I mean, there's no question it will, and it will ultimately lead to it will ultimately include legislation and everything else. It'll make the Senate, in effect, just like the House. And George is right, because if you go back and you look at Federalist 62 and the arguments that were made there, the entire point of the Senate was to distinguish it from the House, to allow it to be a more deliberative body, to slow things down, to be an additional check on the growth of government and the pace at which legislation moves through. And we basically are in the process. This is the first step of us losing that.
One prominent Democrat, Senator Carl Levin from Michigan, voted against this move. Take a listen to what he said today.
Removing these minority protections risks that in the future, important civil and political rights might just disappear because a majority agree that they should. And let us not kid ourselves. The fact that we changed the rules today just to apply to judges and executive nominations does not mean the same precedent won't be used tomorrow or next year or the year after to provide for the end of a filibuster on legislation, on bills that are before us, and on amendments.
George.
Precisely right. There's no limiting principle in the principle they're invoking. That is, majorities should rule all the time. What this means is, if in the spring of 2017 there's a Republican president, which there could be, the Republicans still hold the House and they have 51 senators, they can repeal Obamacare with 51 votes. And I'm not sure the people who did this today have thought this through.
How much do you think it had to do with Obamacare? Either turning the page away from Obamacare, or, you know, there's an element to this that deals with regulation, in that one of the judges they're fighting over is for the circuit here in D.C. that deals with regulatory issues. And now it will be 5-4 Democrat to Republican in that court.
I don't think they did this for one specific reason. I think they threatened it many times, and I think that they did it because they thought they needed a reprieve from they want to get a lot of people voted through and confirmed. I do think it changed the subject of Obamacare, but they knew it would be a two-day story.
I think they did it in part to change the subject from Obamacare, but they want to paint Republicans as hopeless obstructionists, and they think that this helps make their case. I think this will be a one-day, two-day story at most, and we'll return to coverage of near full-time coverage of Obamacare.
Next up, the president tries to cozy up to some liberal media folks as the Obamacare saga continues. Plus, our panel's healthcare solutions. We continue that next.